Jungkook had always been good at hiding his feelings. But lately, it was getting harder. Ever since that day, since he had seen Taehyung on the couch with Sujin, something inside him had cracked. He had spent the entire night trying to push it away, to remind himself that he had no right to feel jealous. But the next morning, when he stepped out of his room, the first thing he saw was Taehyung in the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah," Taehyung was saying, a lazy smile in his voice. "Yesterday was fun. We should do it again sometime." Jungkook's stomach twisted. He didn't need to ask who Taehyung was talking to. He already knew. Forcing himself to act normal, he walked past Taehyung and grabbed a glass of water from the counter. But his hands were trembling, and he gripped the glass too tightly. Taehyung glanced at him, frowning slightly. "Hey, you good?" Jungkook nodded stiffly. "Yeah." Taehyung didn't seem convinced, but before he could say anything else, Sojin's voice on the phone caught his attention. He laughed softly at whatever she said, his tone warm, affectionate. Jungkook couldn't take it. Setting his glass down, he turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. He didn't see the way Taehyung's eyes followed him, lingering on his tense shoulders. For the next few days, Jungkook did everything he could to avoid Taehyung. He stayed late at the gym. He ate meals quickly and disappeared into his room before Taehyung could pull him into a conversation. He barely spoke, barely looked at him. And Taehyung noticed. At first, he just let it slide. Maybe Jungkook was in a mood. Maybe he was stressed. But as the days passed and Jungkook kept his distance, Taehyung started to get frustrated. By the fourth night, he had had enough. Jungkook was lying on his bed, scrolling through his phone when his door burst open. Taehyung stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his jaw tight. Jungkook sighed. "Do you ever knock? Do you ever talk to me anymore?" Taehyung shot back, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "You've been avoiding me?" Jungkook tensed. "I haven't, don't lie." Taehyung cut him off, his voice softer now, but still firm. "You barely even look at me these days." "Did I do something?" Jungkook swallowed. His throat felt tight. "No. I'm just busy." With what? Jungkook clenched his fists. He could feel Taehyung's gaze burning into him, waiting, searching. He couldn't do this. He couldn't stand this conversation. Couldn't stand the way Taehyung was looking at him, like he actually cared, like he wanted to understand. Because if Taehyung looked too closely, he might finally see the truth. "I'm tired, Hyung," Jungkook said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "Just drop it." But Taehyung didn't move. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick, suffocating. Then, finally, Taehyung sighed. "Fine," he muttered. "If you don't want to talk, I won't force you." He turned to leave. But just before he reached the door, he paused. His voice was quieter when he spoke again. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Jungkook squeezed his eyes shut. "No, Hyung. I can't." That night, Jungkook couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the moment Taehyung had walked away, the look in his eyes before he left. He hated this. He hated that he was pushing Taehyung away. But it was better this way. Because if he let himself get too close, if he let himself hope for something that could never happen, it would destroy him. And he wasn't sure if he would survive it. For the next few days, things remained tense between them. Jungkook still avoided Taehyung, but Taehyung had stopped pushing. Instead, He watched, and Jungkook could feel it. Taehyung's eyes on him, studying him, searching for answers. It made him nervous. Because Taehyung was smart. Too smart. And if he kept looking at Jungkook like that, he might start putting the pieces together. One evening, Taehyung came home late. Jungkook was in the living room, flipping mindlessly through TV channels when he heard the front door open. Then came the sound of Taehyung's low voice, talking to someone on the phone. "Yeah, I had fun," Taehyung murmured. "We should do that again sometime." Jungkook's grip on the remote tightened. A few seconds later, Taehyung stepped into the living room, still scrolling through his phone. He looked relaxed, but when his eyes landed on Jungkook, he hesitated. "You're still up?" Taehyung asked, slipping his phone into his pocket. Jungkook shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." Taehyung walked over and flopped onto the couch beside him, stretching his legs out with a groan. Jungkook inhaled sharply. Because Taehyung had showered. His damp hair clung to his forehead, his white t-shirt was slightly oversized, and he smelled like clean soap and something deeper, something distinctly him. Jungkook forced himself to look at the TV. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. Taehyung smirked. Jealous? Jungkook's stomach twisted. "No," he said quickly, too quickly. "Just curious," Taehyung hummed, watching him closely. Then he tilted his head, his voice teasing but careful. "You sure? Because lately, it feels like you're jealous." Jungkook's breath caught. His fingers curled against his thighs as he struggled to keep his expression neutral. "Why would I be jealous?" Taehyung didn't answer right away. He studied Jungkook for a long moment, his eyes dark and unreadable. Then, in a quieter voice, he asked, "Jungkook, is there something you're not telling me?" Jungkook's chest tightened. For a second, just a second, he felt like he was teetering on the edge of something dangerous. He could see it in Taehyung's eyes. The suspicion. The concern. The unspoken question hanging between them. Taehyung was getting too close to the truth. And if Jungkook wasn't careful, he would figure it out. So Jungkook did the only thing he could. He forced a laugh. "Don't be weird, Hyung," he said, shaking his head. "There's nothing to tell." Taehyung didn't look convinced. But he didn't push. Instead, he sighed and leaned back against the couch, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're acting strange, though. You've been avoiding me, and now you're suddenly asking about my dating life." Jungkook swallowed. "I was just curious," he repeated. Taehyung exhaled slowly, watching him for another beat before nodding. "All right," but Jungkook knew him too well. Taehyung wasn't dropping it. He was just waiting. And Jungkook didn't know how much longer he could keep pretending. That night, Jungkook lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He was slipping. For years, he had been so careful, so good at hiding his feelings. But now, Taehyung was noticing the cracks. Jungkook had spent his whole life running from the truth. But maybe he was running out of time. Taehyung wasn't an idiot. He might not have thought much about Jungkook's behavior at first, but now he was sure something was wrong. Jungkook was avoiding him. Not in an obvious way. He still spoke to Taehyung when necessary, still sat with him at meals when their parents were around. But something was off. The way Jungkook looked at him felt different. And the way he looked at Taehyung when he was with someone else? That was what made Taehyung pause. Because he wasn't imagining it, Jungkook had been jealous. He had brushed it off at first, assuming Jungkook was just annoyed by Taehyung's teasing. But the way Jungkook's jaw had clenched, the way his eyes darkened when he asked about Sujin, that wasn't normal. That wasn't how a younger brother should react. And it made Taehyung wonder. One evening, Taehyung decided to test his theory. He purposely invited Sujin over. Not because he was particularly interested in her, he wasn't, but because he wanted to see how Jungkook would react. And sure enough, Jungkook barely lasted 10 minutes in the same room before excusing himself and locking himself in his room. Taehyung watched the door Jungkook had disappeared behind, his brows furrowing. Sujin laughed beside him. "Your brother doesn't like me very much." Taehyung forced a smile. "He's just moody sometimes," but inside, his mind was racing. Why does he hate seeing me with someone else so much? That night, Taehyung didn't go to his own room. Instead, he walked straight to Jungkook's door and knocked. Silence. Taehyung knocked again. "Jungkook. Open up." Still nothing. Frowning, Taehyung twisted the doorknob. It wasn't locked. He pushed the door open, and immediately stopped. Jungkook was sitting on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. His entire body was tense, his fingers gripping his head tightly. He looked exhausted. And the sight made something twist in Taehyung's chest. "Jungkook," he said softly. Jungkook's head snapped up. His eyes widened, panic flashing across his face. "Hyung, what's going on?" Taehyung interrupted, stepping closer. Jungkook immediately stood, backing away like Taehyung's presence alone was too much. "Nothing," he said quickly. "I'm just tired." Taehyung's jaw clenched. "Stop lying." Jungkook flinched. Taehyung exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Look, if you don't want to talk, fine. But stop pushing me away." Jungkook's lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Taehyung took another step forward. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Jungkook swallowed hard. He looked at Taehyung, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. Then, quietly, he whispered, "Not this, Hyung." Taehyung froze. Because Jungkook's voice wasn't just strained. It was broken. And for the first time, Taehyung felt a strange, unfamiliar fear creep into his chest. What was Jungkook hiding from him?